It was well past midnight when the knock echoed through my small house on the outskirts of Pineville, Kentucky. My home had always been a refuge, a serene escape from the hustle and bustle of the world. But tonight, even the familiar silence of the countryside felt unnervingly hollow, as though the very air was holding its breath. Initially, I thought it might be an animal rummaging through the trash cans. But the knocking persisted, a steady, rhythmic sound that pierced the quiet. A sense of discomfort began to creep over me, dispelling the calm of the evening. I debated calling out, but something inside me hesitated. Fear and curiosity tangled within me, leaving me paralyzed for a few moments. I peered through the peephole and saw 2 children on my porch. They appeared to be around 10 or 11 years old, their skin so pale it seemed almost translucent under the faint porch light. Their clothing was antiquated. She wore a long, dark dress with a white apron, while he was clad in a high-collared shirt and knee-length trousers. There was something deeply unsettling about them, a chill that crawled up my spine. I hesitated before inching the door open. The frigid night air cut through me, but it was nothing compared to the icy terror that gripped me when the boy spoke. "Can we come in?" he asked in a flat, emotionless tone. "We need to use your phone." An icy shiver ran down my spine, and I felt an urgent compulsion to slam the door shut, to lock it and retreat. But I was frozen, as if an invisible force held me in place, forcing me to confront the abyss in their eyes. Upon closer inspection, I noticed their eyes were devoid of any human features, no sclera, no iris, just dark voids consuming all light. With great effort, I managed to break away from their gaze and shut the door with a thud that reverberated through the night. I quickly bolted it and secured the chain, leaning heavily against the door, my heart pounding and breath coming in ragged gasps. The knocking ceased, but the subsequent silence was even more unsettling. My own heartbeat seemed to echo in my ears, drowning out every other sound. I waited, straining to hear any indication that the children were still out there, but the night remained eerily quiet. My mind raced, trying to rationalize the encounter. There had to be an explanation, some trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew something far darker and more sinister was at play, something beyond my understanding. As the hours dragged on, I could not shake the oppressive feeling that had settled over me. The silence felt suffocating, as if it were pressing in from all sides. I attempted to distract myself with the television, but the constant noise only amplified my anxiety. Eventually, I gave up and lay staring at the ceiling, unable to escape my thoughts. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. My heart leaped into my throat, and I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I stumbled out of bed, my movements mechanical as I reached for my phone. I needed to call the authorities about the strange children with their void-like eyes. But when I checked my phone, it displayed no signal, a blank screen devoid of any bars or connection. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. The only door to the outside was on the other side of the house, and the windows were too small for escape. I was confined, facing the darkness that had come calling. The footsteps halted outside my bedroom door, and I heard the soft creak of hinges as the door slowly opened. A rush of cold air swept over me, chilling me to the core. I couldn't see anything, but I felt their presence, a heavy weight that seemed to bear down on me. "We need to use your phone," the boy's voice whispered, sending another shudder through me. "Give us your soul, and we will let you live." I wanted to scream, to call for help, but no sound emerged. I sat there, huddled in bed, as their cold, clammy hands touched my face, their breath foul and hot against my skin. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. The room fell into darkness once more, but a faint glimmer of hope remained. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually, dawn's light began to seep through the curtains. I knew I had to leave, to escape the house and the terror that had visited me. As I moved through the house, I felt an unsettling sensation, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every step. I forced myself to keep going, pushing through the gnawing fear that threatened to overwhelm me. It wasn't until I was in my car, the engine roaring to life and tires skidding on the gravel as I sped away, that I allowed myself to breathe. I knew I wouldn't return, that my sanctuary had been tainted by the darkness that had come knocking. But even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, those two children with their dark, empty eyes. And I knew I would never forget the night they came to my door, the night I stared into the void and witnessed true horror. During one of my swimming classes, a peculiar 4-year-old boy appeared among the splashing, laughing children. His name was Ethan, or at least that was what his mother had told me. I still recall her anxious expression as she handed him over to me. "He's a bit unusual," she murmured, her voice low and strained. "Just be patient." From the moment Ethan arrived, it was clear he wasn't like the other kids. He possessed a quiet intensity, a deep-seated awareness in his gaze that felt almost unsettling. The other children, lively and carefree, instinctively shied away from him. Even the parents who usually hovered around the pool stayed clear. The initial lessons passed without incident. Ethan would sit on the pool's edge, observing the other kids with a detached interest. Occasionally, he'd point at them with a trembling finger and whisper, "They don't understand." I attributed his behavior to his age and the natural apprehension of a young child new to swimming. It wasn't the water that frightened him, but rather the other kids, as if they posed some unknown threat. Then, one day, while we were gathered by the pool, Ethan spoke up. His voice, deep and mature for his tiny frame, said, "It's all still here. I can see it." His words, uttered in a somber tone, sent a shiver down my spine. The playful chatter of the other children ceased, replaced by a nervous silence. "What do you mean, Ethan?" I asked gently. He pointed toward the parking lot across the street with a thin, bony finger. "The house. It's right there." I followed his gaze. The parking lot, with its cracked pavement and rows of parked cars, was a desolate, sun-baked expanse. There was no sign of any house. "There's no house there, Ethan. Just a parking lot." His dark, unblinking eyes met mine. "You can't see it because they removed it. But I can still see it. I remember it," he replied, his voice imbued with eerie conviction. His words, though spoken by a child, began to gnaw at me. Despite my attempts to dismiss them, the intensity and certainty in his demeanor planted a seed of discomfort. A few days later, while teaching Ethan how to float, he began speaking again. His tiny voice, though still childlike, was laced with a chilling intensity as he described a house he claimed existed behind the parking lot. He spoke of trees, a porch swing, and the lingering scent of freshly baked bread. He even detailed the interior: a living room with a worn brown couch, a fireplace with antique clocks, and a kitchen with chipped linoleum and a warped countertop. "And there was a scream," he said, lowering his voice to a whisper. "A scream that echoed through the house, filled with fear and despair." Unease settled over me. The details he described were unsettlingly vivid and real. His mature tone and the depth of his descriptions made my skin crawl. "What happened, Ethan?" I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. He stared at me with unreadable eyes and said, "He did it. He killed her. She didn't want to go with him. She didn't want to be with him anymore." The impact of his words was jarring. I fought to maintain composure. "Who is he, Ethan?" "The man with the cold eyes," he whispered. "He was always angry. He wanted her to be happy. But she wasn't. She wanted to leave, so he made sure she couldn't." Ethan described a horrific scene: an angry man with cold eyes, his hands stained with blood, his face twisted in rage. He spoke of a struggle, the woman's desperate pleas, and a final, chilling silence. He further recounted how the man, in his grief and rage, took a bottle of pills from the cabinet and swallowed them one by one, his gaze fixed on a photo frame of a beautiful woman with a haunting smile. "He died there, in the house. He couldn't live without her," Ethan stated with unsettling certainty. I was horrified. The vividness and accuracy of Ethan's story were beyond anything I had anticipated. It wasn't just the story itself but the way he recounted it with a depth of detail that was far beyond his years. I rushed to the internet, searching for any information about a crime, a suicide, or even a house that had once stood on the parking lot. My search yielded nothing. The parking lot had been a concrete wasteland for as long as I could remember. I questioned other staff members at the pool, lifeguards, instructors, all of whom recalled Ethan and his unsettling stories. They were as bewildered and disturbed as I was. The following day, Ethan vanished. His mother never returned, never answered my calls or messages. The other children, though they had avoided Ethan, seemed to sense his absence, their play marked by an eerie silence. I asked my boss about Ethan, the missing boy, and the information I had found. He looked at me blankly, confusion evident. Ethan? Who's Ethan? His bewilderment was disturbing. I sensed he was hiding something. The staff, who had all interacted with Ethan, swore they had never seen him and claimed there was no record of him in our database. The entire ordeal, the accurate details of Ethan's stories, his sudden disappearance, the collective amnesia, and the paralyzing fear, felt like a waking nightmare. I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had transpired, something beyond logic and reason. Years later, the memory of Ethan, the boy who spoke of a past life, faded but never fully left me. I tried to dismiss it as a strange coincidence, a figment of my imagination. Yet the vivid descriptions, the murder, and the suicide continued to haunt my dreams. One day, while driving through my old neighborhood, I found myself in front of the parking lot again. I parked, got out, and stood there, staring at the barren concrete. I closed my eyes, envisioning the house Ethan had described, the worn brown couch, the antique clocks, the chipped linoleum. And then I saw it. In my mind's eye, it was as if the house was standing right before me. I saw the porch swing, the woman's haunting smile in the photo frame on the mantel, and I heard the scream, the echo of fear and despair. I saw the man, his eyes cold and empty, his hands stained with blood, his face a mask of grief and rage. The sense of dread was overwhelming. I was unsure what to believe. Was it a mere coincidence, or a chilling reminder of hidden truths beneath our reality? Driving away from the parking lot, a knot of fear tightened in my stomach. The memory of Ethan, the boy who vanished, who spoke of a past life, continued to haunt me. The chilling details, the sense of certainty, the sudden disappearance, and the collective amnesia left me with a profound unease, a stark reminder of the unknown, the unseen, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be revealed. I realized I had crossed into a realm where the mundane meets the extraordinary, where the rational collides with the unknown. I had witnessed something real, something that defied logic and reason, leaving me with a deep, abiding fear that would remain with me forever. And every time I close my eyes I see the parking lot, the empty space where the house once stood, and hear the echo of Ethan's voice, whispering tales of a past life. I was a dog person through and through. The unconditional love, the wagging tails, the goofy antics, it was all I ever needed. That's why I chose to work at Positive Place, a quaint pet boarding facility tucked away in the heart of the countryside. It wasn't always glamorous, but it was a comforting routine, surrounded by furry friends who never judged. That night, though, the comforting routine took a sinister turn, leaving me forever changed. It had been a particularly dreary day, the kind where the sky hung low and heavy, threatening to unleash its fury. The rain had started around dusk, a soft drizzle at first, then intensifying into a relentless downpour that lashed the windows with a rhythmic drumming. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the shutters as if trying to pry them open. The storm, in all its fury, made the world outside seem distant and surreal, a canvas painted in shades of gray. I finished the last of the evening chores and settled into my small office, tucked away in the corner of the facility. The only light came from the dim glow of my desk lamp, casting long shadows across the walls. I was tired, the day's work having taken its toll. I was about to close my eyes and drift off when I heard it, a sound that pierced the storm's din, a child's voice, calling softly through the deluge. It was a whisper, barely audible over the roar of the wind and rain. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the words. It seemed to be a question, but the wind snatched the syllables away before I could understand. My heart skipped a beat, a prickle of unease running down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something inherently unsettling about the voice. It lacked the innocence of a child's cry, a chilling edge lingering in its tone. Concern gnawed at my insides. There were no children living nearby, and the nearest township was a good 40-minute drive. The rain was torrential, making it impossible for anyone to be out in such weather. Yet, the voice was undeniably real, beckoning from somewhere outside. Hesitantly, I rose from my chair and walked towards the door. Every nerve in my body was on edge, but the sound of that voice, carrying a strange sense of urgency, made me push aside my apprehension. I peeked through the window, the blurry glass offering a distorted view of the raging storm. Then I saw him, a small boy, drenched to the bone, standing at the entrance. He was about 8 or 9, his face obscured by the downpour. His hair, dark as midnight, plastered to his forehead, dripping with water. He wore a faded blue jacket, too small for his thin frame, and his clothes hung limply, saturated from the relentless rain. He was shivering, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. Despite the storm's fury, the boy stood there with an eerie calmness, his wide, dark eyes fixated on me. His gaze was unwavering, intense, and somehow unsettling. It was as if he had been waiting for me, his presence a silent invitation to enter the storm's chaos. The boy's eyes, though, were the most unnerving. They were dark, bottomless pits, reflecting the storm's fury with a chilling intensity. There was a strange glimmer within them, a spark of knowing that seemed far too old for his age. It was an unsettling combination, the innocence of a child trapped in the storm's fury, juxtaposed with the unsettling intelligence in his eyes. Something told me this wasn't just a lost child caught in the rain. There was something else at play, something far more sinister, lurking beneath the surface. But the boy's shivering body and the pleading look in his eyes tugged at my heartstrings. I couldn't just ignore him, not with the storm raging outside. I flung open the door, the wind nearly yanking it out of my grasp. The boy stepped inside, his eyes still fixed on me, his presence unsettlingly still. He didn't speak, just stood there, shivering uncontrollably, his presence radiating a chilling calm. The smell of wet wool and rain filled the air, mingled with something else, an unsettling scent of damp earth and decay, a scent I couldn't quite place, but that sent shivers down my spine. I ushered him into the main reception area, closing the door behind him. The storm's fury seemed to lessen inside, the wind a mere whisper compared to the howling outside. There was a strange, almost tangible shift in the atmosphere, like a silent hush had descended upon the room. The boy, now standing near the entrance, looked around the room, his gaze sweeping across the space. He stopped, his eyes fixated on a photo hanging on the wall. It was a picture of a child, grinning broadly, clutching a stuffed toy. The photo had been taken years ago, before the current owner took over the facility. It was a simple picture, a snapshot of childhood innocence, capturing the joy and wonder in the eyes of a child. But now, as the boy's gaze landed on it, the photo seemed to warp, distort, its colors swirling into an unnatural hue. The child in the photograph seemed to morph before my eyes, the smile turning into a sinister grin, the eyes glowing with an unnatural light. I blinked, trying to shake off the disorienting sensation, but the image persisted, its unsettling transformation becoming increasingly vivid. The boy, his eyes still glued to the photo, mirrored the sinister grin, his demeanor eerily calm, his gaze unsettlingly intense. The dogs, usually a boisterous pack, fell silent, their playful barks and whines replaced by a tense stillness. They huddled together, their bodies pressed close, their tails tucked between their legs. Their eyes, once filled with playful mischief, were now wide with fear, their gazes fixated on the boy and the distorted photo. A cold wave washed over me, shattering the illusion of innocence. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This innocent-looking child was a vessel, a conduit for something far darker. The true nightmare had just begun. The boy looked up at me, his eyes holding a chilling intensity. He opened his mouth, and a whisper escaped his lips, barely audible over the storm's receding roar. "They're waiting," he said, his voice strangely devoid of emotion. "For you." The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. The words hung in the air, heavy with an unspoken threat. I felt a surge of fear, a primal instinct warning me of danger. But it was the boy's gaze, piercing and knowing, that truly chilled me to the bone. I had never considered myself superstitious, but the events unfolding around me were defying logic and reason. The dogs were acting as if they sensed something truly malevolent. The photo, now a twisted mockery of childhood innocence, was a disturbing testament to the unsettling power of the boy. This was no ordinary child, and the fear gripping me was a visceral, undeniable truth. I had to get out. I had to warn someone. But the boy's words, the looming presence of something unseen, held me captive in a silent paralysis. My feet felt rooted to the ground, my body refusing to obey my will. The unsettling silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the soft whimpers of the dogs, their fear mirroring my own. The boy, now shrouded in an unnatural darkness, moved towards me, his eyes burning with an unholy light. He extended a hand towards me, his fingers thin and bony, his touch cold and clammy. I recoiled, the instinct to flee overpowering the paralyzing fear. The storm outside seemed to mirror the chaos within. The wind roared anew, the rain lashing against the windows with renewed fury. The lights flickered, casting ominous shadows across the room, and the air grew thick with the stench of damp earth and decay. The boy chuckled, a low guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "They're coming," he whispered, his voice a chilling echo in the darkness. "For you." And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the strange atmosphere shifted again. The dogs, sensing the change, began to whimper, their eyes wide with terror. The photo on the wall, no longer distorted, flickered back to its previous image, the child's playful smile now a chilling reminder of what had just transpired. The boy was gone. I ran to the door, desperately searching for any trace of the boy, but he was nowhere to be found. The air was thick with the lingering scent of damp earth and decay, and the dogs, huddled together, whimpered in a chorus of fear. The storm outside had intensified, the wind howling like a banshee, the rain lashing against the windows with a relentless fury. I stood there, frozen in a state of numb terror, the events of the past few minutes replaying in my mind like a nightmarish film. The boy was a vessel, a conduit for something far darker. The photo, the dogs, the eerie atmosphere, everything pointed to a truth far too horrifying to comprehend. This wasn't a dream, this wasn't a nightmare. This was real. I stumbled back into my office, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding around me. I closed the door, the wood creaking under the pressure of the storm's fury. The room felt claustrophobic, the shadows seeming to grow longer and deeper. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something unseen was lurking in the darkness. The dogs, huddled in the corner, mirrored my fear, their whimpers echoing my own unease. I tried to rationalize it all, to find a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. The boy, the photo, the unsettling atmosphere, everything defied logic. I was trapped in a reality that had gone haywire, twisted into a nightmarish spectacle from which there seemed to be no escape. The storm raged on, the wind howling against the windows, a constant reminder of the chaos that surrounded me. I clutched my phone, my fingers trembling, the urge to call for help overwhelming my fear. But what could I say? Who would believe me? "They're coming." The boy's chilling whisper resonated in my head, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. I knew that I was trapped in a nightmare, a terrifying reality that was only beginning. The boy, the photo, the storm, they were all pieces of a sinister puzzle, a chilling testament to the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of reality. As the storm raged on, I sat there in my office, the darkness pressing in on me, the fear a cold, relentless companion. I was a prisoner in my own reality, trapped in a nightmare that had only just begun. The boy's words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the unseen danger. "They're coming, for you." And as the night wore on, the storm reaching its crescendo, I knew with a chilling certainty that the true horror was just beginning. The boy had vanished, but the darkness he had brought with him lingered, a palpable presence in the air. The storm, the dogs, the photo, they were all connected, each a piece of a sinister puzzle that I was piecing together with every passing moment. I knew that I was not simply a witness to this horror, I was a target. I wanted to believe that I had just encountered a troubled child, a victim of the storm's fury, but the truth was far more terrifying. The boy, and the darkness he carried, had taken root in this facility, this sanctuary for animals, and what lay ahead was a nightmare I was powerless to stop. As the night wore on, I watched the storm rage outside, the howling wind and driving rain mirroring the turmoil within. The dogs whimpered, huddled together in their fear, and I, unable to escape the terror gripping my heart, sank deeper into a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. And as the first rays of dawn pierced through the storm clouds, I steeled myself for the nightmare that lay ahead. The boy was gone, but the darkness he had brought with him lingered, a menacing presence that threatened to consume me whole. I was a prisoner in my own nightmare, and the true horror had only just begun. When my niece was around 3 years old, she was terrified of the boy in her closet. As a concerned uncle, I couldn't bear to see her so frightened, so I decided to stay over in her room while she slept, leaving her parents just down the hall. That night, I settled into the twin bed in her room, surrounded by her stuffed animals and blankets. Exhausted from the long drive and emotional strain, I fell asleep quickly. In the dead of night, something roused me. I wasn't sure what it was, perhaps a creak in the old house or a soft whisper of my name. Whatever the cause, it jolted me upright, my heart pounding. Then, I noticed a child at the foot of the bed. She appeared to be about 3 or 4, with a pale face and dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown from the early 1900s. Her tangled hair added to her unsettling appearance. Initially, I thought it might be my niece checking on me, but something felt off. My niece would never have moved so quietly in her sleep, and the child's expression was more curious than anxious. As I reached for my glasses to see more clearly, I felt a weight on my chest, pinning me down. Despite my efforts to move or cry out, I remained immobile. The child's gaze was intense, as if she was studying me closely. The sensation lasted only moments, though it felt much longer. When the pressure finally lifted, I gasped for air, my chest aching from the effort. I glanced around, but the child was gone. I rubbed my eyes, questioning if it had been a dream, but the feeling of that weight was unmistakably real. Shaken, I left the room and collapsed on the living room couch, trying to make sense of the experience. My mind raced with questions, but as dawn broke, I made my excuses and left for home. I kept the night's events to myself, fearing that others might dismiss my experience as mere imagination. However, the memory lingered, and soon after, I began noticing unusual occurrences at my own home, objects moving, unexplained footsteps, and fleeting glimpses of movement. Initially, I tried to rationalize these events as tricks of the mind. However, as they became more frequent, I sought answers. I delved into research on hauntings and consulted with paranormal experts. Gradually, I came to understand that the child I had encountered was a spirit, trapped and lonely. I made efforts to help her find peace through various means, and over time, the strange occurrences diminished. Although I never saw the spirit again, I felt a sense of relief, knowing that I had possibly aided in her departure. This experience profoundly affected me, revealing a dimension of existence beyond the physical world. Now, as I tuck my own children in at night, I think of that child and hope she has found the peace she sought. In all my years as a school counselor, I believed I had encountered every type of trauma a child could face. But nothing prepared me for the day I met 8-year-old Sophie. She arrived at Cedar Ridge Elementary with a quiet, almost eerie demeanor that immediately set her apart from the other children. Her eyes, large and dark, seemed to hold secrets too heavy for someone her age. Her parents, Hank and Maria, were known in town but rarely seen, and the brief interactions I had with them during parent-teacher conferences were always brief and unsettling. Sophie's case began like many others, small signs of neglect that escalated over time. Teachers noticed she came to school in dirty clothes and often appeared malnourished. She seemed detached from her peers and would frequently stare off into the distance, lost in her own world. I was assigned to investigate her situation, and what I uncovered was deeply troubling. During one of my visits to their home, I found the house in disarray. The living conditions were appalling: stale food left out, an accumulation of garbage, and a general air of neglect. Hank and Maria's response to my inquiries was cold and dismissive. They never met my gaze and spoke in curt, almost robotic tones. When I questioned them about Sophie's well-being, their answers were evasive, and their unease was palpable. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. During one particularly harrowing visit, I witnessed signs of physical harm on Sophie. Her arms were covered in bruises, and she flinched at sudden movements. It became clear that her parents were not just neglecting her, they were actively harming her. Faced with this horrifying reality, I made the difficult decision to intervene. I arranged for Sophie to be removed from her parents' care and placed her in a temporary shelter while searching for a more permanent foster home. Since no immediate placement was available, I decided to take Sophie into my own home. I thought it would be a short-term solution, just a few days until a proper foster family could be found. But from the moment she stepped through my door, the atmosphere in my house changed dramatically. At first, it was the little things, the way doors creaked open on their own, the unsettling flicker of lights. I dismissed these occurrences as coincidences or the quirks of an old house. But then, things started to escalate. Sophie's behavior grew increasingly strange. She would often stand in the darkened hallway, staring blankly into the distance. I would find her at odd hours, standing by my bed with her wide eyes reflecting the moonlight. When I asked if she needed anything, she would simply smile and say she couldn't sleep. The more time I spent with Sophie, the more I felt an undercurrent of dread. She spoke with a maturity and confidence far beyond her years, and her knowledge of unsettling details about the house and its past was unnerving. I began having vivid nightmares, images of Sophie standing over me with a twisted, unrecognizable face. The fear became so intense that I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, only to find her asleep in her room, her presence as hauntingly calm as ever. One night, the terror reached its peak. I had just settled into bed after a long day when I heard loud banging coming from the attic. It sounded like someone, or something, was stomping around, causing a commotion. I tried to rationalize the noise as settling sounds of the house or a problem with the plumbing, but the noise was relentless and growing louder. Trembling, I climbed the stairs to the attic, only to find it empty. The darkness seemed to press in around me, and I felt a cold draft that made my skin crawl. Despite my attempts to reassure myself that these occurrences were mere figments of stress, the feeling of an unseen presence grew stronger. I started noticing shadows flitting at the edge of my vision and hearing whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Sophie's behavior continued to be unsettlingly calm amidst the chaos. She seemed unfazed by the strange happenings, often sitting quietly as if she were waiting for something. The more I tried to protect her, the more the house seemed to fight back. Items would go missing, only to reappear in odd places. I could feel a palpable sense of malevolence in the air, as though the house itself was alive with dark intent. It became clear that Sophie was not just a child in need of saving, there was something more sinister attached to her. I reached out to colleagues and professionals for help, but no one could provide any logical explanation for the phenomena occurring in my home. Some suggested it might be stress or an overactive imagination, but I knew what I was experiencing was real. The sense of dread was overwhelming, and every night became a battle against the encroaching darkness. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. I couldn't continue living in a house that felt increasingly like a prison of terror. I contacted the authorities urgently, demanding that they find a permanent foster home for Sophie as quickly as possible. When the day came for her to leave, the relief was almost tangible. The house felt lighter, as if the oppressive weight of the malevolent presence had lifted with her departure. As I watched Sophie leave with the social worker, she turned to me with that same eerie smile she had worn throughout her stay. Her parting words were chilling. "You can't save them all." I was left to grapple with the haunting truth of her statement. The house eventually returned to normal, but the memories of those dark nights lingered, a constant reminder of the inexplicable horrors I had faced. It wasn't until after Sophie left that I understood her parents weren't the true monsters. They had been trying to protect themselves from her. The darkness that had plagued my home was not a result of their actions but something far more sinister, something I couldn't fully comprehend. The experience left me forever changed, a stark reminder of the shadows that can lurk behind even the most innocent facades.